Hello YouTube and welcome to Synthetic Oil Info. In this video we're going to talk about the problems created by ethanol fuel that almost all of you are finding in the fuel pumps at your gas stations. Ethanol was added to fuel several years ago in order to reduce our demand on imported oil. As you know, gasoline comes from crude oil, and we import a very large percentage of our crude oil from other countries, South Korea, the Middle East, and several other countries around the world. So that oil comes in, goes through the refining process, and gasoline is one of the products that comes out of that refining process. So what they decided to do was, okay, we're going to start blending ethanol, which is an alcohol derivative, with that gasoline in order to reduce the amount of gasoline that we have to produce. So there are many different ways that you can produce that alcohol, but the one that the United States has primarily chosen to use is to derive it from corn. Through another refining or distillation process, corn and corn byproducts are used to create an alcohol liquid, and then that liquid is eventually blended into the gasoline. Now on the surface that all sounds great. You know, we are using a locally derived product to reduce our demand on foreign oil, and that has worked, but there are some problems with ethanol that are now showing up in our vehicles because of the inherent issues with alcohol in internal combustion engines. And the first one of those is that that alcohol, or the ethanol, attracts water. It absorbs water from the atmosphere into the fuel, and so now you get you have much higher chance that you're going to pull water into your fuel system. And as you know, engines don't run on water, they run on fuel. And so when you start pulling all of that water into your fuel system and it tries to pump it into your engine, it can create some pretty big problems. You get rust and corrosion inside of your system to start with. Your engine doesn't run as well. And if that water concentration gets high enough, it can actually cause damage to your fuel pump and your fuel injectors. Those are the things that really get beat up by all that water in there, because those injectors are designed to handle and flow fuel, gasoline in this case, and they can do so with the alcohol. But when you start bringing those water molecules in there, it creates havoc inside those injectors and can damage those injectors to where they have to be replaced. You know, so that's one of the problems, is that the alcohol is absorbing water into your fuel. The other big problem, and I've had this in my own equipment, is that if that alcohol or ethanol is not burned within about 30 days from the time you put it into your fuel system, it starts to form into what I call an ethanol sludge. It forms into this like white paste like material that will plug up anything that that is contained in. And going back to your injectors for a minute, and your fuel pump, those things are designed to pump liquid, not ethanol sludge or paste. And so it will plug up your fuel system and cost you some very expensive repair bills to either replace those items or clean them out. If you treat your gasoline with a fuel stabilizer, that can extend that period out to anywhere from 45 to 90 days, depending upon the quality of the fuel and the cleanliness of the fuel, and the atmospheric conditions. There's all kinds of conditions that can affect this. So you can extend the life of that ethanol-based fuel out with a fuel stabilizer, but nothing like you could with, you've seen the commercials on TV for products like Stay-Bill or anything like that, or Heat, the old yellow bottles of Heat, where you could treat fuel and run in and leave it in your system, or leave it in your boat, or leave it in your motorcycle, whatever, until the next operating season, even as far up maybe as like a year. Ethanol-based fuel, even treated, will not last near that long before it starts to dissolve or decay into this ethanol sludge that I called it. So you've really got to be careful with ethanol-based fuel. If you have it in your system, treated or not, you've got to get that stuff burnt and replaced, or replaced with fuel that does not contain any ethanol or alcohol. The other problem that people are noticing, and the government knew this when they decided that they wanted to pursue this, and the oil companies, is that alcohol or ethanol that is in your fuel does not make as much energy when it burns as gasoline does. That energy is measured in British thermal units, or BTUs. That's how scientists measure the energy output of any heat source, basically, is from a British thermal unit, BTU. And so if you have 100% tank full of pure gasoline in your car, and then you compare that to a tank full of, let's say, 10% ethanol, or E10, so you've got 90% pure gasoline and 10% alcohol or ethanol in your fuel tank. That 10% of ethanol is not going to produce as much energy as if that tank of pure gasoline. So when your car is running down the road, it's going to have to consume more volume, or a higher volume of fuel, in order to produce the same power. And so if you want to drive down the road at 60 miles an hour, you're going to end up burning more fuel if you have a mixture of gasoline and ethanol or alcohol in your fuel tank. And so the trade-off was supposed to be that ethanol-based fuels were going to be cheaper. I haven't noticed that. Maybe they are. But I also noticed that I'm having these other problems, which the cost of treating those other problems far exceeds any savings that I may have had at the pump when I have to buy that fuel. So especially if you have, I have a new Harley Davidson motorcycle, and so I'm very careful with it to not run ethanol fuel in there, because those engines tend to run hotter because they are running leaner, because there's not as much energy being released with that fuel. And the vast majority of vehicles on the market today cannot distinguish the mixture of gasoline and ethanol that's in the fuel tank. So the computer is firing the fuel injectors as if there was 100% load of gasoline in there, and in most cases there's not. And so the engine is not operating, not producing as much power as it is capable of producing if you had pure gasoline. So you're going to get less miles per gallon. You're going to consume more fuel to go the same distance and produce the same power. And you've got all these problems associated with water in your fuel, and that the forming of ethanol sludge if you leave that fuel sit for very long. So I just caution you, you can run the ethanol-based fuel in your cars and pickups and everything else that you're constantly filling up and replacing, if those vehicles are not in storage. Just keep that fuel used up. But if you've got vehicles or equipment that you're going to put into storage, motorcycles, lawnmowers, boat motors, anything else that is seasonal and that you have to put into storage at some time throughout the year, don't run them dry. That's worse, or that's just as bad, because all the seals and O-rings and everything will dry up in the fuel system, and they won't run right, and they'll leak next year. But find a gas station or a fuel source that sells pure gasoline, and there's starting to be more and more of them now, especially around marinas or places that support a lot of power sports equipment. There's several gas stations around me now here in the Atlanta area that carry pure gasoline, non-ethanol fuel, and buy that, treat it with a fuel stabilizer before you put that fuel into this equipment or these vehicles, and then run those vehicles or those engines long enough to make sure that treated pure gasoline is getting all the way down into the injectors, into the engine. So, run it for, 5 or 10 minutes to make sure that fuel is getting all the way through the fuel system before you put it away for the year. And if you do that, you'll be much happier next year when you go out there to start it and it starts right up. Now, if you're going to start running that equipment and you're going to run it constantly, for a full season, then if you have to, you can run ethanol fuel in there again while you're burning that fuel out of there, on a frequent basis. But then if you have to go back into storage again, you really need to go back to that pure gasoline that's been treated with a fuel stabilizer. This video is not really an advertisement for AMSOIL products, but AMSOIL does have a couple of products that will help you with this. And the main one is QuickShot. Let me get it on the camera here. So QuickShot is AMSOIL's best product right now for treating ethanol fuel, especially treating vehicles or equipment that has suffered under what I call that ethanol sludge. And if you can catch that early enough, QuickShot will go in there and clean out any of that sludge that has not completely dried. I had a pressure washer here a couple years ago that I had left a little bit of gas in the bottom of the carburetor. I thought I had got it all drained out, and I made the mistake of draining the whole system, and so I had to take that carburetor apart and use piano wire to dig that sludge out of the bottom of the main jet in the carburetor. QuickShot, none of these other products would even get up in there and clean that out, so I had to physically clean it. And that's what's keeping a lot of your lawnmower repair places in business right now, is these engines get plugged up with ethanol sludge, and then they have to clean them out. So yeah, a product like QuickShot, or a product, the other one that you could use to prevent some problems before they occur is AMSOIL's PI. This is primarily a fuel system cleaner, but it will also clean out some of that ethanol sludge. Not quite as good as the QuickShot. I had a handheld blower that had never run right from brand new, and I'd always been running ethanol-based fuel in it. And the first time I ran QuickShot through that blower, it immediately, probably within 2 to 3 minutes of running, I could tell a big difference in the way it ran, and the way it idled, and in the way it started. I had always had to start the blower even when it was warm with the choke partially on. And as soon as I ran QuickShot through there, cleaned all that out, now the blower runs great. And I attribute all of that to QuickShot, because I'd tried everything else. I'd even tried PI, and it had not made a difference. But as soon as I put QuickShot in there, it cleaned that ethanol sludge out of there, and that blower runs great now. So just to kind of recap, in most cases you're going to be forced to run ethanol-based fuel. Keep it rotated in your tank, and treat it with something like AMSOIL's QuickShot occasionally to keep that sludge from forming in there. But if you have to put a vehicle into storage, make sure you've put pure gasoline in there if you can get it, and treat it before you put it away with a fuel stabilizer or something like QuickShot. AMSOIL also makes a fuel stabilizer as well, so check that out on the AMSOIL website for storage purposes. But just know that if you're running an ethanol-based fuel, you're not going to get quite as much power, and you're not going to get as much fuel economy out of that equipment or out of that vehicle. The one trade-off that I forgot to mention is that ethanol does have a higher octane rating, and so some of your newer vehicles may have a higher mechanical compression ratio or static compression ratio because they are assuming that you're running ethanol, and so that ethanol bumps up the octane rating of that whole fuel load. a little bit, and so it allows them to run a slightly higher compression ratio, which can compensate for a little bit of that power loss that you've got because the ethanol does not produce as many BTUs or as much energy. So there's some trade-off that they're trying to work with there. I've noticed new cars, Mazda's new Sky Active technology and many other new cars are running compression ratios back up, 11, 12 to 1 mechanical compression ratios. And those are compression ratios we have not seen in a gasoline engine since the muscle car days of the late 60s, back when we had leaded 105 octane ethyl or premium fuel available, which we haven't had for a long time. So they're achieving some of that higher compression ratio by assuming that you're putting some ethanol in there. But they've got many other technologies on these vehicles that are allowing them to run that higher compression ratio that are beyond the scope of this video. So again, you're going to be forced to run it most of the time. Treat it. Don't use it if you can when you put vehicles or equipment into storage, and treat that fuel with a product like AMSOIL's Quick Shot. And that's about it. I wish there was more I could say about it in terms of something we could do to prevent these problems, or that there was another solution coming immediately that didn't require us to consume so much corn, which has driven up our food prices. But that is the way it is today. And so we can do some things to work around that. But we're stuck with that for a while. So post your comments or concerns or questions below. We'll see if we can get answers to them. And that's it for today. My name is Tom Brown. This is Synthetic Oil Info. Closing out for now. Hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.